Okay, hello all. Welcome to our program here with Conservation Nebraska and Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. I'm Eric Davis. I'm a Conservation Director with Conservation Nebraska's AmeriCorps program. And we do events every month with different types of conservation issues. Today we have Kari Mohlman. She is a wildlife biologist at Platte River Recovery here in Kearney, Nebraska. And they are a unique program that started in 97, I believe, or 2007, one of the two. I can't remember.
I kind of go over it in my presentation.
Yeah, she'll go over that, the unique program, but it has to do with conservation along the Platte River Basin from Chapman all the way to the headwaters of both the North and South Platte River. So I'll let Kari take on and we'll get through this together.
I'm just gonna remind everyone of some quick things about technology side of things. So I'm Grace Collars. I'm a fellow AmeriCorps member. So I just want to remind everyone that you are automatically muted and your cameras are turned off. And so if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function or the chat function. And there will be a poll sent out at the end of this presentation, just for some feedback. It's about 3 questions, won't take more than a minute. And it'll just give us some good ideas about what you guys want to learn about and for future events. And if you complete the poll, your name will be entered once for a $25 gift card. So I recommend completing it. But yeah, and I'm gonna let you take over and enjoy the event, guys.
Alrighty, hello everyone. As Eric had mentioned, my name's Kari Mohlman. I'm a wildlife biologist with Headwater Corporation, which is an environmental consultant company that implements the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. And you might hear me refer to it as PRRIP or the program, as it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm the lead on our tern and plover monitoring project. And today I'm going to give a brief background on who the program is, what we do, and then the majority of the presentation will focus on our monitoring and management in relation to piping plovers. One of the overarching goals for the program is to provide benefits for our 4 endangered or threatened target species and their habitats in the Central Platte River. These 4 species are piping plovers, whooping cranes, interior least terns, and pallid sturgeon. PRRIP's focused on enhancing, restoring, and protecting habitat for these species along the Central Platte River through adaptive management. And in the case of the pallid sturgeon, we provide benefit to the habitat in the lower Platte through the already existing program water use for our other target species. To provide information on species response to our habitat management, the program staff monitors species behavior, their habitat use, and their reproductive output. The program was initiated at the start of 2007, but it came about as a part of a cooperative agreement that started way back in 1997 between Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska, as well as the U.S. Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, water users such as public power and irrigation companies, and various conservation and environmental groups like Roe, Crane Trust, and Audubon. But PRRIP is led by a governance committee that's made up of representatives from those different organizations. However, we do also have advisory committees that are used to assist the governance committee. And these committees include like a technical advisory committee, committees for land, water, as well as an independent scientific advisory committee and a finance committee. I'm actually a part of the executive director's office, and our office handles the day-to-day functions of the program, which include monitoring and management, which I mentioned, as well as using adaptive management to test our hypotheses and use that data to help inform the committees and hopefully improve our management decisions. The associated habitat reach, that's a 90-mile stretch along the Central Platte River between Lexington and Chapman, Nebraska. That's where the program monitors and manages our on and off channel nesting and foraging habitat. The Platte River is a braided river system. It's quite shallow in most places and has mobile sandbars that move and change with the flow. And then one of the program goals with this river habitat is to maintain wide channel widths and prevent the vegetation from taking over as that narrows and incisors the channel. Most of our target species prefer wide and shallow unvegetated areas. Our management objective for terns and plovers is to improve their production along the Central Platte River. And we want to do this by increasing the number of fledged plover and tern chicks. Fledged means they're able to fly. And for terns, they're considered fledged when they reach 21 days old, and for plovers, 28, which we're attempting to reach this objective by increasing breeding pairs, which would be nesting pairs, increasing fledge ratios, which fledge ratios are fledges per breeding pair, and that indicator would be chicks successfully produced per adult pair or per nest. And we also want to reduce chick mortality from causes like flooding, predation, weather, and inadequate forage, as well as reduce adult mortality by reducing predation. The program no longer bans or recites bans for plovers or terns. However, the footage I'm about to show is from one of our old band reciting cameras at a tern nest. Although we're still monitoring and managing for both terns and plovers, moving forward, the program's main focus will be on piping plovers, as the least tern was removed from the federal endangered list in 2021. However, an interior least tern does remain protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and Nebraska Non-Game and Endangered Species Conservation Act. So we'll continue to monitor and manage for least terns in a manner that's consistent with our ongoing plover management. Both species, though, do have similar enough habitat requirements that benefits provided for plovers should continue to provide benefits for terns. Piping plovers have a breeding population in the Great Plains, Great Lakes, and along that eastern Atlantic coast, which you can see in the pale red or salmon color. That blue color on the map shows their non-breeding range, where they overwinter along the Gulf Coast, southeastern Atlantic, and Cuba. Piping plover adults, they're about the size of a robin. To give you a visual size reference in relation to my hand, you can see a picture on the left from when we used to ban piping plovers, which we stopped doing in 2016. They have a sandy gray coloration with that white underbelly and orange legs year round. And both of these pictures are of their breeding plumage. During the breeding season, their appearance changes and they develop that beak, which is normally fully black, changes to orange with a black tip. Their plumage changes as well, and they develop a black line on their forehead right between the eyes, as well as a black collar. And although the males will usually have a thicker collar and a thicker band between the eyes, one that usually reaches the eyes, this varies quite a bit between individuals, so it's not a really consistent way to ID between sexes. Along the reach, they'll typically begin arriving in late April to early May, and the males will arrive first, and they'll build several potential nest bowls, or what we call scrapes, which are just shallow depressions in the sand. And they'll try to attract a mate by circling and making a figure 8 above them while calling. And then once they do attract a female, the male will lead the female around to the different nest bowls so she can test them out before they choose one, which is one thing we have to make sure of when we're monitoring, is to make sure that what we're observing is an actual initiated nest and that they're not just out still testing various nest bowls. Once they do choose a spot, they have courtship that includes the male doing a tilt display, which you can see in the pictures to the right, where he'll put his head down low with his tail raised and fanned out and the wings slightly raised. Another part of their display includes goose stepping, which you can see on the bottom left. And then this was actually a video of courtship behavior that I was sent today by our predator research lead, Kaylee Kelson, as she was reviewing camera footage. But you'll be able to see the male do kind of a tilt display. Don't get a very good view of it. And hear some of those calls. And then as they come around back into view, you can transition into what that goose stepping that I'd mentioned before. Once they've mated, they'll begin laying eggs, one every other day, and then both parents will take turns brooding. Although we often have multiple nests on the same site, they are solitary nesters and very territorial. Once they establish a territory, the pair will defend it from other intruders by fluffing up their feathers so they can appear larger. They'll put their head down and charge. You can see an example of that on the bottom left. And then one of the defensive mechanisms they use to protect their nest from predators is what we call broken winging. You can see that on the two pictures to the right. And that's where they'll attempt to draw potential predators away from their nest by pretending to be injured. And they can do this by holding their wing out, flopping it around, and calling very loudly to draw the attention of the predators. Another method they use is camouflaged eggs, and that makes them difficult to spot. Eggs typically match the surrounding substrate pretty well, and plovers will lay up to 4 eggs. The eggs are teardrop shaped with that tan sandy coloring, and then they're speckled with those gray and brown dots you see and lighter splotches in the background. But eggs do vary quite a bit in appearance and color at times, and sometimes you'll get slightly darker eggs, sometimes you'll have larger faded splotches instead of smaller speckles. Plovers do prefer like the bare, sparsely vegetated sand and gravel for nesting. And that bottom right picture is a good example of how they'll line the nest bowl with pebbles. Though we do see some nests that are in more cobbled areas rather than the more sandy substrate. The incubation period for piping plovers is about 28 days, so almost a month. And plover pairs will alternate their incubation while the other forages. Parents can also be seen taking trips down to the water where they'll wet their feathers, and this helps keep the eggs cool and prevents them from overheating as the sand does get quite hot. Because we have to always be aware that temperatures on the sand during the summer are usually about 5 degrees hotter than off of the site, or at least when the sun is out. Once they're hatched, plover chicks stay in and around the nest bowl for 1, maybe 2 days before they move down to the shorelines to forage, which also helps them stay cool during the day. They can forage for themselves, but they do rely on the adults for protection and to help them stay warm overnight. And then as they get older, they'll lose that fuzz, they'll develop feathers and get their adult coloration. And once they are fledged, the fledges from off-channel sites eventually follow the adults over to the river, where they'll feed and loaf on sandbars. And once again, they have that fledge of 28 days, which is the same as incubation. Here are some examples of our on and off-channel habitat for terns and plovers. River or on-channel habitat includes sandbars, which are either naturally formed or constructed, which are used for their foraging or nesting when the minimum habitat requirements are met at least. And then the off-channel sand and water habitat on the right for plovers includes rehabilitated sand and gravel mines and constructed nesting sites. The program's found for us that the ideal design is a lobed peninsula that has like a level central area and then graded and shallow slopes to the water so they can maximize both the nesting habitat and the shorelines. So they have equal opportunity for foraging. And then adult plovers forage on low elevation river sandbars or along the waterline of off-channel sand and water habitat. So they are more reliant on that off-channel site shoreline while nesting. And then juveniles from those off-channel sites, they'll forage along those shorelines until they fledge, and then they'll follow the adults over to the river channel. Between 2009 and 2014, the program did create and rehabilitate off-channel sand and water sites, as well as built and managed on-channel habitat. However, while we still do manage and maintain about 10 acres of on-channel habitat annually, and we follow what we call a moving complex approach, the program did move away from creating on-channel nesting islands because on-channel habitat is extremely variable. It's limited and unstable and erodes quickly along the Central Platte anyway, especially when there's flood or ice jam events. Also, it tends to have less successful nesting because water flow releases inundate those potential nesting sandbars, and the peak flows often occur around or just after peak nesting, which potentially floods nests or broods. It's especially problematic as plovers have a low probability of renesting and low success when they do renest. And then although there has been some nesting that's occurred on riverine sandbars in the past, the last plover nest on the river along the reach occurred in 2016. So off-channel sand and water sites do provide the most consistently stable and available habitat for plovers from year to year. And most nesting along the reach has occurred on these off-channel sites. Management on tern and plover nesting areas does vary by site, and not all sites that are monitored for PRRIP are managed by the program. But the management and maintenance that the program does do on our sites includes mechanical actions. We do this to create nesting habitat by using heavy equipment such as dozers, scrapers, and backhoes. And then those mechanical actions to improve nesting conditions and remove vegetated cover include disking, tree removal, and nest furniture distribution, which plovers will use logs, sticks, large cobble, and various other scraps on the site, such as even old PVC pipes as nesting furniture. We also use chemical application, and that's used to kill or prevent emergence of vegetation. And we do that through spring and fall herbicide application. Predator control is done through trapping, fencing, and predator deterrent lights. We also install signs to prevent the public and pets from going onto the nesting sites and prevent the nest and chicks from being trampled. This is an example of one of the off-channel sand and water sites that was acquired and rehabilitated. This is still an active mining site, but that area outlined in red is an area where mining was completed, and the program was able to convert it to plover and tern nesting habitat. Here are some images taken after the rehabilitation was completed. The moats were all widened, and on all of our program managed sites, we do have moats that are at least 100 feet wide. We removed trash piles, trees, and sand and gravel piles. And then the nesting area was leveled out and low areas was filled in so that the water wouldn't sit on the site. And then those shoreline slopes were improved and made more accessible for the birds, especially once the chicks get hatched and are able to go to the shoreline. Permanent and temporary predator fences were installed there. And then we also put avian spikes on all of our potential non-removable perches. Those would be things like power poles and fence lines. Typically, trees within 500 feet of the nesting site are also removed. In cases like this, though, property boundaries do prevent that. Monitoring methods and protocols have changed greatly over the span of the program, and they're based on our needs and the information we're trying to gather. But current regular monitoring is done to collect counts for adults, nests, chicks, and fledges. Our monitoring season runs from May 1st up until the birds leave, which is typically mid to late August. This monitoring includes river surveys, which are conducted twice a month along that entire 90-mile reach along the main channels anyway. And then river surveys are typically done from an airboat, but we do use kayaks and canoes when the flow is too high to safely use an airboat, or when we're unable to fit underneath the various bridges. What we call outside monitoring is done twice a month, and that's done at all sites until nesting is observed. It's done using scopes and binoculars from outside the nesting area. And this year we have 18 different sites that we're monitoring. All of them are off-channel sites, and of those 18 sites, only 6 of them are program managed. Once nesting is observed, we do transition to monitoring the nests and broods at the site twice a week from outside. This is true for both our on and off-channel nesting sites. Piping plovers have shown an overall positive response to program management. Counts such as breeding pairs, nests, and broods, which would be successful nests, have generally increased over time from 2001 to 2021. Breeding pairs have shown a significant increase with additions of off-channel sand and water habitat. Our nest success has been stable, but our proportion of successful chicks, although it's been gradual, has been slightly declining over time. Fledge ratios, which I had mentioned, it's one of our indicators of success for the program. They're highly variable annually, which is common and can be seen in other areas and other programs' data. Overall, they've remained stable long-term, but we did have concerningly low dips in 2018 and 2019, which terns also experienced a dip in 2019. And these dips were the lowest that we've seen since about 2008. The decline in that proportion of successful chicks and the dip in fledge ratios for both terns and plovers led us to investigate into potential causes and some management steps we could take. One thing that was identified as an important objective for improving the reproductive success was reducing predation. So we did initiate a study that looked at the effectiveness of different types of predator deterrent methods and how our managed species would react. 2021 was the second year we had additional management present on some of our sites. And then along with that existing management, I talked about additional predator management in the form of lights and fencing were deployed on 3 of those 6 program managed sites. We had interior and exterior predator exclusion fencing, and then 3 types of predator deterrent lights, which would be random pattern, motion activated, and blinking strobe lights, which all of those have spikes attached to prevent them from being used as predator perches. In order to document potential predator presence, help evaluate the impacts of predation, determine how effective our management is, along with the regular monitoring at all 6 of those program managed sites. We also implemented track surveys. These were done along the shorelines and deployed 3 different levels of cameras. We had trail cameras deployed along the shoreline and at a site level, as well as nest level cameras, which are a mix of trail cameras and Arlos. Deploying them on all program managed sites allowed us to compare between the sites that had management and did not have additional management. They were deployed in kind of a tiered fashion and combined with terrestrial predator trapping from outside the sites to allow us to document predator presence and predation events across all of our barriers or across our management types, moving from outside the nesting area down to the nest level. Those nest level cameras are deployed on both tern and plover nests, even though we're focusing on plovers for our management moving forward. We did this to give us a larger sample size, as there are quite a few more tern nests than plover nests. This is just an example from 2021 of the additional monitoring that was deployed on our 6 program managed sites. That green dotted line represents track surveys. Those were conducted along the shoreline within 15 feet of the water. The blue represents shoreline cameras, which were trail cams that were mounted to 3-foot tall posts. The orange is site level cameras, which were previously attached to 5 to 6 foot tall PVC pipes, but those were lowered to 4-foot high level for this season. And then the yellow represents nest level cameras. Both the trail camera and Arlo are pictured. Just as an example of potential predators that have been documented on our sites, both with this project and previous projects, our predator community includes, but is certainly not limited to, bald eagles. They've never been documented predating our species, but they do use the site for loafing, playing, and so on. Red foxes have been a large issue in the past. When they do manage to get on a site, they'll wipe out nests, chicks, and sometimes even adults, and then they'll stash them for later so they can come back. We have American badgers, striped skunks, river otters, snakes of multiple kinds. This was a picture from a snake that had recently predated a tern nest. We have a ton of raccoons, crows, toads and bullfrogs are present, although this was the only documented case of potential predation. We also have other avians such as kestrels and owls. In 2021, remote camera monitoring was extremely helpful for us. It allowed us to quantify the impact of predation, helped us improve accuracy for monitoring, reduce the number of unknown fates for our nests, as well as allowed us to determine what stage the nest or the chicks were at the time of loss. Cameras were placed, as I mentioned, on the 6 program managed sites, and camera density was dependent on site size, but was about 1 every 2 acres, with a preference for placement on plover nests when they were available. Out of the total 149 nests that we had last year, and that was across all sites, cameras were placed on 56 nests. 30 of those were plover nests, which was over half the total plover nests we had, and 26 were tern nests. Effort was measured through camera days, which would be the number of days that the camera was deployed, for a combined effort of 668 camera days across all sites. Let's see, looking at the results that we had from the nest cameras at our program managed sites, we had a total of 36 unique predator presence or predation events that were documented on nest cameras. Registers or presence of predators does not mean, well, registers or presence of the predators means that they were captured on camera, but does not necessarily mean that they predated the eggs or chicks. Of those 36 events, 15 of them were predation events, where the predator was captured on camera, consuming or destroying eggs or chicks in the nest bowl, which 14 of those were by great horned owls and 1 by an American crow. And then in addition to those, we had 2 additional camera monitored nests that were determined predated, leading to a total of 17 predation events at camera monitored nests, which is just at camera monitored nests and not the total predated amount that we had across all sites. And although the actual predation event was not captured by the nest camera due to malfunction, these 2 nests were determined predated by a badger and an unknown species due to several other pieces of evidence. Cameras help us determine specific predation timing and quantify impact at the nest level. In 2021, these predation events resulted in the loss of 12 plover nests, 42 eggs, and 5 chicks. For terns, we lost 5 tern nests and 15 eggs. And while nest cameras do allow us to gather a lot of helpful information, we have very little information on our predation losses of mobile chicks, which would mean ones that are no longer at the nest bowl. That poses a problem for us, as the program observations have shown that our plover chick success is lower than our nest success and is on a current downward trend and seems to be where the majority of our losses occur. We documented no plover or tern avoidance of our additional monitoring or management, and there was no negative effect on nest survival between nests with and without cameras. In 2021, avian registers were more common than mammalian registers. And when looking at management effectiveness in 2021 on all program managed sites, a decrease in terrestrial predator registers was seen as the predators encountered those existing barriers or that deployed management, moving from outside the site down to the nest level. The additional management that was deployed on those 3 program managed sites appears to have been effective in reducing that terrestrial predation and registers even farther, as most mammalian registers did occur at the sites without that additional management. However, our management did not appear to be effective at reducing avian predation, at least last year, as those avians were present across all of our levels of monitoring, and we did experience heavy nest predation by avian predators even at the sites with additional management. And then in 2021, we observed that most of the cameras, that had documented predation events occurred farther along in their incubation. That results in the loss of a greater investment and reduces the probability of successful renesting. For plovers, nests would average about 63% developed when predated, and terns average 92%. This video that I'll show is one of the videos we had of a great horned owl. It's predating both the chicks and the eggs. This one does have wind in the background. I have the volume pretty low, but it might still be a bit loud, just a heads up. This setup had both an Arlo camera and trail camera to test whether our Arlo cameras were triggering and catching everything, as last year was the first season we had Arlo cams. You should be able to see here in a second in the background those plover adults, which are calling and attempting to draw the owl away from the nest. And this was another great horned owl predation event. The owl in front is an adult, and once I play it, if you look in the background, you can see eyes bobbing. That's a juvenile that the adult is calling over to the nest. And you can also, yeah, you can hear the tern and plover alarm calls in the background. Moving forward, the program does plan to continue with our regular baseline monitoring, where we monitor plover and tern reproductive success, as well as continue with our predator research to determine how much of an effect predation has on our plover productivity, and how effective we are at reducing plover losses due to predation. It's important for us to continue this predator research over the course of a few years. That way we have a larger data set and we're able to determine not only the impact, as I mentioned, but other information such as if predation is variable or consistent across years for both species composition and quantity or across our different sites. In 2021, our main issue was with avian predators, specifically great horned owls. But next year, our issues may be with a different species. For example, we did have issues with red foxes on previous years at certain sites. As a quick aside, this is a video of a turkey vulture. It was taken near a leased tern nest. You'll be able to see the adult dive bombing the vulture and screeching. And this is just one of the ways they protect their nests and drive away predators. And if you're ever out near a tern nest, you will also likely discover that they will poop on potential predators as well. And that more active tern defensive behavior likely provides some benefit to plovers, or at least like a very loud alarm. So they do seem to benefit from nesting near one another. Today we went over some basics of who the program is, what we do, our management for some of our specific target species and their habitat, as well as impact to predation and our current research on how to mitigate our losses due to predation. Was there any questions on anything I had just presented? Gotta get back to the main day.
Actually, I do have a question. Besides the spikes on the posts, what other types of things could help prevent more avian attacks?
We have to give it a few more years, but we are attempting to discover whether those lights and well, it'd mostly be the lights that would provide benefit for avian species, but we've only really had one good year of having things out on the site other than our very quick pilot year. We also have that nest furniture that I mentioned does provide shelter for the chicks, and they will hide beside it underneath it. There's also potential for using chick shelters. We could build those. There's also potential for, there's been talk about using nest caging, which would help at the nest level, but not so much for the chicks once they leave the nest bowl. And then other than that, things are kind of still under discussion on other ways we might try. But it also kind of depends on, we need to discover which species are a problem. Are great horned owls going to be a problem consistently? Was it just last year? So our management strategy will vary depending on what we find out.
All right.
Any other questions? You can put them in-
Yeah, thank you. And if you have any more questions, you can drop them in the Q&A box. I'm going to release the feedback poll while Eric does the outros for everyone.
Here's the poll. It only takes a sec. Thank you for all who participated in today's event. And thank you very much, Kari, for your time. And hopefully we can see the piping plover be off that list soon.
Yeah, hopefully. And then I will, as you said, I'll drop my email in the chat. If anybody ever has any questions, they can reach me at that email. But,
Yes, and if you have any questions about your Conservation Nebraska events or any conservation issues at all, I'm going to drop my email as well into the chat function. And yeah, feel free to email me. All our events are posted on our Facebook page. Just look up Conservation Nebraska, and this event will actually be recorded as well and uploaded to our YouTube page. And yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
thank you for hosting.
Yes.
Of
Glad
course.
for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good.